these questions will be answered at the end of the session. And I now request Dr. Samson Sujit Kumar sir, who is a medical director at Unicorpus Word Indeed Hospital and one of the directors at Unicorpus Health Foundation. He is also a consultant neuro and spine surgeon at Unicorpus Health Word Indeed Hospital, to give a brief introduction to the work being done at Unicorpus.
Good evening, everyone. And Dr. Joseph, I'm audible, Amma?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Greetings to you all on behalf of Unicorpus Health Foundation. I'm Dr. Samson, and I'm one of the directors at Unicorpus Health Foundation. A warm welcome to all the participants, especially the speakers, Dr. Suchitra, Dr. Kalyan, and Dr. Rahul, for willingly accepting this invitation and to share your knowledge regarding COVID-19 in children. I'm sure it's going to be an informative session and a blessing for all of us as we prepare for the COVID third wave in case it is going to be intense. Unicorpus Health Foundation is a not-for-profit organization that is registered with the Government of India as a Section 8 company. And it is started by a group of medical and non-medical professionals with a vision to work together as a team to provide quality surgical and medical services at affordable rates. At present, Unicorpus Health Foundation is functioning through medical and dental multi-specialty polyclinics in Secunderabad at YMCA Center and a 40-bedded hospital in the eastern suburbs of Hyderabad, Unicorpus Word Indeed Hospital. And it's also active through various programs like health education programs, also involving the public in healthcare dialogue through our Know and Own Your Health series, through our pamphlets and health awareness programs. Unicorpus Health Foundation is also active through its publications, mainly in the form of Unicorpus newsletter, which focuses on geriatric care, which is one of the focus for Unicorpus Health Foundation. And it is active at present during this COVID times. It has been running various COVID-related programs successfully in the form of online home isolation programs, isolation center at YMCA, and a COVID center at Word Indeed to provide COVID care for inpatients who require oxygen therapy up to NIV, non-invasive ventilation. So I think this current times, as we are very busy with this COVID work, and the speculations that we might be moving towards a COVID third wave, which may be affecting children more than other people. So I think it's a good time to come together as a medical fraternity to understand this disease in terms of in terms of infection in children. So I would like to thank all the participants once again and welcome all of you for this webinar. Thank you one and all. God bless us all. Over to you, Dr. Josna, please.
Thank you, sir. As sir said, Unicorpus Health Foundation provides affordable, ethical, and evidence-based compassionate holistic care services through various programs. We'll now have a brief introduction to the COVID-19 in children and the current scenario. COVID-19 is caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus, which has two key spike protein mutation, which has led to the Delta variant, which is now so rampant across our country. So all across the world, there's around 12 million COVID-19 cases that had occurred in children and adolescents, which is 13% of 88 million COVID-19 cases in 100 countries. B1.617.2 variant, that is a Delta variant, is known to have the highest transmissibility, and this is now increasing, has highest infectious rates in India, UK, and the US, and this has been the cause for the upsurge in the second wave in COVID-19. In India, around 18.6 million COVID cases have been reported in the year 2021 as compared to 10.3 million cases last year. The Delta variant is a primary cause behind the country's deadly second wave and the 50% more contagious than the Alpha strain that is first spotted in the UK. This is according to the recent study by the Indian government panel. And the Delta strain is also believed to be more easily transmitted among the children, and the cases have been increasing on the rise in Nepal, UK, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, and also recently in the Australia. The 2 doses of COVID vaccine provide 81% protection against the Delta variant as compared to as compared to 87% protection against the Alpha variant. But one dose only provides 33% against the Delta variant, where one dose provides protection of 51% against the Alpha variant. So we can say that the single dose vaccine is 35% less effective against the Delta variant. So the variant with high transmissibility is a huge danger to people without immunity, either from the vaccination or prior infection. And even if the variant is more deadly than previous versions of the virus. So the rapid spread of Delta variant prompting warnings that a third wave may already be underway in the country, among who many remain unvaccinated still. The new variant is in circulation the second time, has also been impacting children, and more children have been affected from states like Karnataka and several districts of Maharashtra. This is COVID-19 in children is not only a health crisis, but it's a universal crisis. But and it also affects several other aspects of a child's life. So around 140 million children in the developing countries are projected to be living under the poverty line. 463 million children worldwide are unable to access remote learning during COVID-19. And approximately 150 million children additional are living in a multi-dimensional poverty without access to essential services, and an increase in stillbirths of the next 12 months is predicted due to the impact of COVID-19. Due to COVID-19 measures, there have been approximately about 80 million children under the age of 1 who in at least 68 countries may miss out receiving life-saving vaccines, and 66% of these countries reported a disruption in services against stopping violence against children in these countries. And there's a risk of increase in child marriages in different parts of the underdeveloped countries because of the economic insecurity, which can lead to increase in child marriages as a way to relieve the financial pressure. With this as a background, I would now welcome the team to present on COVID-19, and we as Unicorpus are organizing this webinar in line with the series of Know and Own Your Health. So I now request Dr. Sucharita, Madam, to talk to us about airway management, oxygen therapy, and MISC in children. Dr. Sucharita has done MD Pediatrics, who's an Associate Professor of Pediatrics at Gandhi Medical College and Hospital, and has also worked as Assistant Professor of Pediatrics in Nilofer Hospital for 7 years. She's also a member of IAP, and she has won gold medal in 2011 for the 32nd IAP AP State Conference. She's also been a state and a national level faculty and a trainer. Welcome, Dr. Sucharita. It's a privilege to have you here amongst us and to learn more about COVID-19 in children.
Thank you, Josna. At the outset, I would like to thank Unicorpus Foundation for giving me this opportunity. I also thank Dr. Samson Sujit sir for giving this wonderful opportunity to meet you all and on this virtual platform to enlighten about what is happening and what is about to come. So till date, because it has been, COVID has been affecting in the first and second waves, it is the older generation and the middle age, and now they're expecting the third wave. Hopefully that the reasons why the third wave, unfortunately, we need to say will not be the children. That's a good thing that we look forward for. But if the mutant strains take a course or entry source in a different way, only then we can expect. Otherwise, there are few things which we need to consider why the mutant strain will not enter into children. The first most important is the anatomy of the children. That is the receptors. The AC receptors are quite few in number from birth till the age of 14 years. So that is the age group wherein because of decrease or the less number of this AC receptors, we do not see this virus getting attached. So they are relatively safe. Other possibility is there is a cross-reactive humoral immunity and T-cell immunity between common coronavirus. So they already have an immunity. So they are also spared for this reason, the respiratory infections and the route and mode of spread is very less in children. The other important feature is the T-cell helper to immune response. They are much more good in children, which is the protective. And children are well immunized and vaccinated, receiving BCG, MMR. All these have also the additive points for them to be spared for getting the infection. Above that, also there are few studies which stated that eosinophilia with helper cells also may be protective. So with all these things, we will not expect a third wave to come in, but there is one important criteria. As we have seen in the first wave, the number of children affected were around the same thing like the adult. When we compare to adults, it's only the 1 to 2%. The same thing in the second wave, but the infectivity rate has increased in adults. So the children's infectivity rate also was increased. So we would like to see how this presentation will go on in the next few minutes. Josna, can I share the screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, from my side, okay. 1 minute.
Yes.
1 minute. Cancel. Oh.
No, not yet.
1 minute. No. 1 minute. I'm just going back to the screen. Find out where my things are. Yes. Oh. I think it is on the desktop. Finding it little difficult. Are you able to?
Yeah. Your PowerPoint is opening.
1 minute. Coming down. Yes.
Yes.
So what remained important was the lung getting involved. There are few conditions wherein the lung is getting involved with the existing comorbid conditions, or the children who are prone to have this respiratory infections because of the underlying deficits or the defects, congenital, or it could be because of acquired reasons. So the main thing is a hypoxia management that is important in the management of COVID, acute and severe COVID, whereas this is only in the acute presentation. But what is MISC exactly what we are looking into? This is seen only after the wave flattens. Usually after the spike, we notice this kind of system after a period of 2 to 4 weeks following the COVID infection. Can you mute everyone? There's some disturbance around. So we will look into next few slides when we go for MISC. I'll talk to that. But prior to that, what is important? So when the COVID has started, it was not enough for us to do our best, but we should know also what to do, and then we need to do the best. This is what I have taken a quote from Edward Deming. He was a famous, engineer who has worked out only based on these, notes. So coming to the introduction of hypoxemic respiratory failure, what we see in this kind of COVID presentation of respiratory insult. Here, the signs what we have to see as a failure are respiratory rate in any child above 70 is respiratory failure with severe cyanosis, grunting, chest retraction, similarly inability to talk or feed, head nodding. These are all the common findings that we see when a child is entering into the respiratory failure. So this is without notice, like in adults, we don't have that kind of happy hypoxemia in child, but we can see them as an early presentation. So what would be the goals for your oxygen therapy is to correct the hypoxemia and to decrease the symptoms of hypoxemia by supplemental oxygen in various methods or various ways, to decrease the work of breathing, and also to increase the blood supply to the brain, which is more the developing thing in the children that we see as they are in the growing age. Coming to the general principles for the respiratory support, The management of the children with severe acute respiratory infection, that is SARI, we call it in COVID, it is similar to any other viral pneumonias with ARDS presentation, because the SARS is also a severe acute respiratory syndrome. So, but here there are few restrictions or precautions that we need to follow when we are going ahead with using of oxygen devices, like to reduce the aerosol generating procedures. Instead of using nebulizer, we go with MDI with spacer. So how do the oxygen supplementation go ahead? So there are few things wherein hypoxemia can be prevented by supplementing oxygen. There are like low flow oxygen by nasal cannulas or high flow nasal cannula, non-breathing mask with reservoir. The final stay will be the invasive ventilation, which is required only for about the 1% of the children in the 100. If you consider as 100 as a total number, you have only 1 to 2% per invasive ventilation. Of last 1 year, 1.5 years, we have been observing, we did not get much cases of invasive ventilation, but definitely those children, we had normal, regular pneumonias presenting. They required only a non-breathing, till the non-breathing mask with reservoir, they could come out. So oxygen therapy, how to supply, how much to supply is important. Unlike in adults, it is different in children. So for children with oxygen saturation less than 94, they are considered to be a milder cases. And with having a respiratory distress, the respiratory distress will be again scored based on their presentation. So less than by the age presentation, mild, moderate, and severe. There is a classification like if you have the distress, respiratory distress in terms of respiratory rate. Okay, rate will be like early. It should be more less than 50 up to 2 months, and then for 1 year it will be around 30, and then it is 40, and above that it should be less than 30, that is normal. But anything more than 30 at 1 year, we consider this as a mild respiratory distress. So as we go ahead, what oxygen devices can provide to the children, we see that there are low flow oxygen devices, that is through nasal cannula. When you supplement oxygen with a nasal cannula, it is only 1 to 2 liters per minute for infants and 2 to 4 liters per minute for younger children. And for younger children, it is less than 12 years. And above that, it is 4 to 6 liters per minute for adolescents. These low flow oxygen devices, they give only a minimal supply of oxygen delivery, around 28% only, and less than 28% if required. So the next will be the nasal mask. So whenever you put a nasal cannula, you're not supposed to leave the child by connecting cannula, so that the aerosol generation will be more. So we advise to cover them with a triple layered mask. For the case where you are using a mask for the oxygen supplementation, when it provides little higher concentration of oxygen, 6 to 8 liters can be provided by this, and 50% up to 50% can be delivered. So here in this condition also, you can cover the child's airway by, not letting the aerosol spread by covering with a triple layered mask. So Venturi mask, there are also Venturi masks to deliver an oxygen concentration of about 24 to 60%. And there is a device that can be connected into the face mask. So this mixes the air with oxygen, and we can deliver up to 60% FiO2 with this. And you can deliver of at least 15 liters, but up to 15 liters per minute oxygen can be delivered through this Venturi mask. Another one is a non-breathing mask, where the non-breathable mask allows around 10 to 15 liters per minute. And an FiO2, if needed, higher FiO2 needed, like 80 to 90% also can be provided. But this non-rebreathing mask has to be applied only just before going for the invasive ventilation, and not before that. So these are the things that the Venturi thing which will be connected to the mask inside when oxygen port is connected. Here is a Venturi. The blue and white are the normal things that we use. As FiO2 required up to 30% only, we take them. And above that, if FiO2 required, we go for high flow nasal cannula rather than going with the Venturi flow devices. So this is a non-rebreathing mask wherein the expired gas can be protected by covering with a nasal mask to prevent the aerosol spread. And you have a bag wherein the reservoir bag, which gives you 100% of oxygen concentration. So it increases or improves the oxygenation capacity, thereby decreases hypoxemic damage to the organs. So what is high flow nasal cannula? High flow nasal cannula, this is a higher oxygen flow that inspiratory demand flow according to the clinical situation or the condition of the child. So this is in the type of moderate respiratory distress cases, wherein there is retractions and rate as per the age I mentioned already. And you also see that the child has minimal amount of cyanosis developing. The child can speak, but not completely. But FiO2 here can be started at 60% and titrated to achieve the targeted SpO2. So use of this HFNC will delay the invasive ventilation. Initially, this HFNC was not started for the reasons that aerosol spread is more. But because the children do spare, the lungs of the children do spare much with this HFNC, we started using it, and the results are also very good with this Airvo machine or the high flow nasal cannula. How to use it is, this is a chart that is described. We need to start the FiO2 of 0.4 to 0.6 and then titrate the SpO2 to 90 to 95. And for first 10 kgs, it is only 1 liter per kg to start up, and then 0.5 liter per kg from then onwards. And that is how we go ahead increasing the oxygen supply to them. And then we have to monitor these parameters like heart rate, respiratory rates, and signs of work of breathing and SpO2. While all these are monitored, also the consciousness is more important. If the child is going unconscious or is not improving with this, then we have to consider for going for invasive ventilation. So as you go ahead for this parameters and keep monitoring, around 24 to 48 hours, we can go with improvement, and the weaning can be started. The weaning also has to be started by 0.5 liter per kg every 4 to 6 hours, and then continuous monitoring. So even in the weaning phase, the continuous monitoring need to be done with the same parameters, the heart rate, respiratory rate, sign of work of breathing, SpO2, and the consciousness. With improving of these signs, you have to come down, and FiO2 of 0.4, when it reaches to FiO2 0.4 and saturations have been maintained, that is SpO2 is more than 92%, therein you can go with a Venturi mask or a nasal cannula for further continuation of oxygen supplementation. So non-rebreathing mask with reservoir, this is also a good source. But here what we are using is, when FiO2 is required at a higher concentration, we go with this. And this is used only before we are ending up with an invasive ventilation where the demand is more and the failure, and when the child is setting into the respiratory failure. So if you are entering into the invasive ventilation, early intubation preferred for patients of PaO2 by FiO2 more than 300. And if the child is not maintaining with an FiO2 of 60% on HFNC, or if the child develops multiple organ dysfunction. So how do you prepare for this? We need to have an expertise, and we need to reduce the droplet infection or sources. We can either go with a head box with the hands, with the openings provided on either side to go for intubation. And before intubation, we need to see that the pre-medication, that is a midazolam, benzodiazepine, and an pseudo-analgesia, what we call sedation as well as analgesic, need to be given at midazolam at 0.1 to 0.2 milligram per kg and fentanyl 2 to 3 microgram per kg body weight. So this reduces the aerosol spread and allows early intubation. So pre-oxygenation with a non-rebreathing mask need to be provided for 5 minutes at least before we intubate. Now on ventilation, in this ARDS picture, unlike the COVID ARDS, yes, we need to go with volume, low tidal volume, and then the pressures can be taken up to high pressures can be delivered. There are few studies which stated that at low PEEP also it is maintained. The main thing is that opening of the alveoli remains the mainstay. How the alveoli are open and patent and how it delivers oxygen, and then assures for the ventilation perfusion to happen in a normal drive. So here the settings are low tidal volume 4 to 8 ml per kg. The peak pressure should be around 28 to 30 can be considered. Mean arterial pressure at less than 18 to 20. And the driving pressure should be around 15 centimeters. And PEEP will be around 6 to 10 or higher if required. But here it is not requiring so high like in other conditions leading to ARDS. So coming to, these are all the oxygen devices that we use for maintaining the oxygen saturations. So this was the acute phase where we use the oxygen supplementation. Now coming to MISC, what is MISC and how we are going ahead with MISC in children? So MISC has got like multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children. It's called as a pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome or pediatric inflammatory multisystem TS. There is a toxic shock. So it has got different names, CAVA COVID, or it is a CISCO presentation, systemic inflammatory syndrome with COVID. So these are all multiple variant terms used worldwide to describe the condition. So coming to this condition, it's a new pediatric disease associated with SARS-CoV-2 that is too dangerous or lethal, and 2% of 1 lakh persons under 21 years. This is a worldwide data that has given to us. And there is a lag of 3 to 4 weeks between the peak attainment, because this time the peak was in May. So we will be expecting this in over next few weeks. So this is what we are ready or prepared for to handle the MISC cases. Our knowledge should be more about the MISC. So with prompt recognition and medical attention, most of the children will survive. In last wave, we lost few cases for not recognizing at the earliest. That makes us a warning sign to know how the MISC symptoms present with. So there are a few studies from, first of all, the reported cases of this MISC was from UK. They have done in a tertiary care center, and from there we came to know how the MISC symptoms have followed. This is how it shows. Initially, this is the wave, the blue line shows the wave peak which reaches, and the pink wave is the MISC cases, how they take. This is after the initial start of this, about 2 to 6 weeks. It starts after that, and then it rises. When the wave starts flattening, we see the MISC cases rising. So what causes this? The pathogenesis mainly is, it is an antibody-dependent enhancement of inflammation. So the autoantibodies develop, and the T cell recognition of the self-antigens, viral mimicry of the host results into the autoantibodies and result in the multi-system inflammatory condition in children. So in the first stage of infection, we see asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. Yes, even this group also lands up at an MISC. Maybe the child was never diagnosed, or the child was never tested for COVID in the acute condition. Some of the children who are affected, there will not be any pulmonary severity. Might be the child had only upper respiratory or mild illness. So here in this stage, after the second stage where the macrophage activation is taking, this usually occurs in the around 2 to 4 weeks. And then there is the two type of immune mediated system, wherein you have either the innate immunity or the humoral immunity that takes up the antibodies and cause for the hyperimmune response. The helper cells go with the release of the cytokine storm, with the release of interleukins, especially interleukin 1, interleukin 6. They are more released into circulation, and the areas where these are more seen is the vessel walls, the median sized arteries, like mostly the coronary arteries are involved. So where coronaries are involved, you find a Kawa-COVID type of presentation. So this hyperimmune response leads to various presentations in a child, from involving all the organs, right from CNS to the mucocutaneous presentation, to cardiac presentation, GI presentation, renal presentation as AKI. So every system is being involved. So this is what has to be borne in mind as of now, as we are looking forward for the MISC in children. So even the neonates are not spared. We do have reported cases of MISN. This is seen when the mother was affected with the COVID prior to delivery, at least. Okay. Am I audible, Josna?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Yeah. So here what happens is, the immune response is, while the child is born, maybe as a normal child or normal newborn with a normal weight and other parameters, but what is important is it develops something like a sepsis kind of presentation, feeding intolerance, or developing a NEC kind of presentation with an abdominal distension, vomiting of entire feeds, not maintaining the saturations. All this lead to the doubt. I mean, all these presumptions have given us a clue to look forward for how these children are presenting who are born to the COVID positive mothers. And when the antibodies are tested, yes, there was a high fold rise, like 4 to 5 times rise of antibodies, and they themselves act for the hyperimmune response in children in the presentation, like hyponatremia, oliguria, renal failure, or anasarca presentation, or in a gastrointestinal presentation, or pulmonary infiltrates in few cases, not many. So all these are seen at the earliest, but we need to rule out the common sepsis factors also. Ruling out the common septicemia early or the early onset sepsis findings, then we are supposed to go with other investigations, like don't jump into D-dimers at the earliest. We will look for other signs of infections ruling out. Then we look for neutropenia or lymphopenia with thrombocytopenia because of the viral suppression seen. And then the fibrinogen levels if decreasing, then it is the right time to start up with IVIG for them. There are few cases, 2 to 3 cases we have treated, and the children are doing better after 4 weeks of stay in hospital. Yes, so the WHO criteria for less than 19 years, what is it? It says that fever more than 3 days with the clinical features and the evidence of inflammation and no obvious microbial cause leading to the clinical features, and evidence of COVID-19 in the family or the child getting affected leads to a condition called MISC. So this is the criteria. What are the things is fever more than 3 days duration with a rash presentation, hypotension or shock, myocardial dysfunction, pericarditis, valvulitis, coronary abnormalities, or evidence of coagulopathy or acute gastrointestinal problems. So multi-organ involvement of all this involvement, at least 2 signs if are seen along with the fever of prolonged duration, that is when we are supposed to go with the inflammatory markers. The main inflammatory markers at the earliest will be the CRP and the serum ferritin or LDH or portocalcitonin, not the D-dimers and IL-6 at the initial presentation. And without any other microbial causes, we need to rule out other conditions also, cross infections with the dengue or doing a Vidal test, rule out typhoid infections and rule out other viral causes also like H1N1. Ruling out these conditions, we can consider that if evidence of RT-PCR antigen test earlier done positive, or if the serology is showing positive, we will consider this as MISC. So how much percentage of illness that we can come across? Neurological signs are about 56%, presents like a meningitis, or it can be presenting like an encephalopathy kind of presentations, or acute encephalitic syndromes can be presented. Conjunctival condition is quite commonly seen in most of the conditions. Severe conjunctival congestion and red cracked lips with a tongue, strawberry tongue can be seen in 87%. And respiratory signs are seen in a mild cases like 12% only. GI symptoms are more because the AC receptors here are more. So there is a more responsiveness to the humoral immunity developing. Also the child developing a GI kind of presentation more. And cervical adenopathy is seen in 37 cases. And the coronary is getting involved. That is, Kawa-COVID type of presentation can be seen in around 19% of cases. Edema of hands and feet can be seen in around 68% of the cases. And diffuse rash, skin rash, that is seen in most of the cases as a clinical variant presentation in MISC. So these are the symptoms like gastrointestinal. What are the symptoms? Acute vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain. These are the severe kind of presentation. Now we are coming across these kind of presentations at the earliest. And the child may have bilateral conjunctival non-purulent type of conjunctivitis. And then there is a hypotension or shock if the child is presenting, or you need to monitor these parameters. And cardiac involvement. Cardiac involvement can be the early feature at initial stage, but there are conditions where the cardiac involvement can be seen at a later stage also. So you need to follow up the child over 6 weeks, then 3 months. If the child had the hyper-inflammatory kind of presentation and the elevated markers along. And D-dimer test is the last thing that we consider, and not the simple rise of D-dimers by 1-2 times. It is more than 5 times need to be considered as elevated D-dimers, and that is when the intervention need to be considered for. So features of cardiac involvement, myocardial dysfunction, or it can be coronary involvement. So if myocardial dysfunction, it is presenting as a pericarditis, there is a troponin increase, or if it is a valvulitis, we can see NT-proBNP type of peptide proteins are increased. This will give us a clue to say that the myocardium has involved, or coronaries are involved, especially when the NT-proBNP type of peptide proteins are increased. So this is a Kawa-COVID type of presentation wherein the rash you can see, and conjunctival congestion, edema, scrotal edema can be visualized, and the cracking of the lips, peeling of the skin also is seen. This is one of the presentation in our hospital what we have come across. You can see the happy hypoxia kind of presentation. The blue lips were there initially, and there is a peeling of the fingertips, and bluish discoloration. This have come down drastically once we have given a IVIG supplementation along with the steroid. It presents like a Raynaud's type of phenomenon here. So what is the important pitfall here is physical findings, they may not appear simultaneously, but may evolve over several days. So the coronary artery aneurysms also develop late in disease, or they occur at a later, or they improve on their own. So as earlier I have mentioned, what are the things to be considered when you are watching a child to be developing this MISC? So fever, myalgia, you need to consider. Then headache and decreased visual disturbances. Think about meningismus, and then you go for the inflammatory markers. At the earliest, go for the inflammatory markers of CRP, ferritin, LDH in the initial phase. If they are raised by more than 5 times, then you need to consider the other cytokine inflammatory markers like IL-6. Then you need to go for even procalcitonin, D-dimers also. The other systems involved for the lung, we have already mentioned. You see the respiratory findings the child is present with. And hematologically, there will be thrombocytopenia, neutrophilia, lymphopenia. So this is actually NLR ratio. We consider it in the acute COVID. If it is going more than 3.5, then we consider it as a presentation for MISC here also. So this is a child presenting after 4 weeks of infection post-COVID. You can see the conjunctival congestion as well as the strawberry kind of tongue. And you can see the rash that is present. We need to evaluate other conditions also. The conjunctival conditions is not mucopurulent, so measles have to be ruled out. There is no nasal discharge. And the high rise of temperature for more than 3 days. These are the findings that we need to look. Sometimes the child also presents with glandular swellings or lymph node swellings. This is the rash that is seen, confluent rash, maculopapular rash, distributed all over the body. So other infections like rickettsial infections or scrub typhus also have to be ruled out before you label them, because this is a season that we have entered and we need to be watchful about. So these kind of papular lashes are also seen on the chest. Yes, these are the presentations, the peeling of the skin COVID presentations. This is also a presentation wherein the tongue is, you can see the strawberry tongue and conjunctival congestion, the rashes. And this is a recent child. The last picture is the recent child who had all the parameters elevated by more than 5 times, and after IVIG has drastically improved. So MISC versus the COVID, how do you differentiate this MISC to that of the Kawasaki disease? It has similar findings of Kawasaki, which is a connective tissue type of presentation. Here also we have the abdominal symptoms, more common, and thrombocytopenia, anemia, lymphopenia are more common here, and elevated ferritin, troponin I, procalcitonin, and pro-BNP, they are more common and severe form when compared to the normal Kawasaki. The MISC has more. What are the investigations of choice? So there are 2 tier of investigations. When you see that the child has unremitting fever and epidemiological link is there for the SARS-CoV-2, or if there is no presentation, I mean, there are no clinical features of suggesting of all this, then you have to rule out other alternative diagnosis, what I've already mentioned. That is like scrub typhus or rickettsial fevers or typhoid or dengue or malaria, whatever other reasons because of the seasonal changes. If these clinical findings are present and there is a epidemiological link, then go for the if you find the child in shock or any life-threatening manifestation, then there are 2 tier of investigations. If the child is in shock, you need to go with both the tier of investigations at the earliest. If the child is not in shock but has fever and a clinical presentation, then go with the tier 1 type of evaluation, which I will be discussing in the next slide. So this tier 1 evaluation, if there is a positive screen, that is a rising of the inflammatory markers noted, then we need to go for the second tier of evaluation. If the screen is negative at first tier, then we need to go look for the alternative diagnosis by ruling out other infections by doing the blood cultures, urine cultures, and the remaining investigations pertaining to the expected condition. So the first tier of investigations will be the CBC, LFT, RFT, blood class, blood glucose, CRP, ESR, SARS-CoV-2 serology, which will show us if the child was not epidemiologically diagnosed for the antigen earlier, and blood culture test. So this remains as the first thing. If the positive tier is seen, that is, what do you think about this tier 1 screen as a positive is, CRP should be more than 5 milligram per deciliter and ESR more than 40 per hour, and at least one of the parameters of the blood picture, that is ALC less than 1000, neutrophilia present. Acute lymphocyte will be less than this, but neutrophilia will be present. and platelet will be less than 0.5, that is thrombocytopenia presentation, hypoalbuminemia or hyponatremia. If these are the presentations that you notice, then we can consider as MISC and go for the second tier of investigations, wherein the cardiac evaluation has to be done with ECG, echocardiogram, the BNP, troponin T to rule out the cardiac involvement or the coronary's involvement, and then the inflammatory markers like procalcitonin, the cytokine storm releasing the inflammatory markers, and the acute phase reactants like the ferritin, D-dimers, fibrinogen has to be considered as the second panel of investigations. Also, the blood smear and SARS-CoV-2 serology needs to be sent here. So the common tropical infections, which include all this, also have like there are cross infections with malaria, dengue, enteric fever, rickettsial illness, crab typhus. So we have to rule out simultaneously these conditions. If either of them is present, they can present associate with COVID also. So the laboratory findings, which was already dealt with, I said that the inflammatory markers are quite high elevated, and there is a hypoalbuminemia, hyponatremia, and lymphocytopenia noted. So these are the classical parameters that will look us to give into MISC kind of presentation. So how often you need to do the cardiac specific recommendation? ECG should be done at least 48 hourly, and then echo should be repeated 7 to 14 days, and after that 4 to 6 weeks. And a cardiac MRI is required in case if the echo was showing ejection fraction less than 55, and the Z-score of the coronaries are showing that it is less than 2.5, more than 2.5, then we need to consider that coronaries are involved, and we need to go for cardiac MRI in the next 2 to 6 months, and need to monitor for the left ventricular ejection fraction, how it improves as gradually we go with the management also. And cardiac CT will be done in cases suspecting coronary aneurysms if diagnosed at the earliest. So serology, most of the cases, 60% have IgG indicating the past infection. RT-PCR for SARS-CoV-2, only a third of MISC cases are positive here. RT-PCR, why is it coming positive is again a question. So we have we came to know after doing a RT-PCR from initial stages and then repeating it every 7 days and 10 days in initial phase. That is the first wave, wherein there was repetition of the test to see whether the child turned or the adult turned into negative. So there we came to know that RT-PCR remains positive over a longer duration in some cases. So that also, along with the serology, if it is positive, we have to consider that as MISC. So testing for other pathogens is important. So that's what I was mentioning, like blood culture, urine culture, throat cultures, stool cultures also need to be sent to rule out the other existing or coexisting infections. And nasopharyngeal aspirate or throat swab for respiratory viral panel need to be sent. That common viruses like EBV, CMV, serology, and PCR. So this is a coronary aneurysm. 20% incidence is seen in acute phase. We can see more than 3 dilatation of the coronaries. So what is the treatment of choice here? So WHO MIS criteria, if they are fulfilling, you need to go ahead with the MISC thing. Or if they are not fulfilling the WHO but having abnormal vital signs, there is a neurodeficit, hepatic or renal dysfunction, marked elevation of the inflammatory markers, and abnormal EEG, ECG or cardiac markers, there also you need to go ahead for treatment. So every child need not be admitted. There are 3 categories of MISC. In first category, there is no presentation of shock or any organ dysfunction, multi-organ dysfunction. There is only prolonged fevers and rise of inflammatory markers. These children are considered as a mild cases and can be managed with steroids at the earliest. The steroids are only 2 steroids. High potent steroids are spared, but low potent, mild potent like methylprednisolone, 0.15 mg per kg per day. This can be given for 5 days. If DEXA is used, it is once a day, 0.15 mg per kg. That will be dealt next. And what are the treatment goals? To reverse the shock in case if the child is present in shock, and to reverse the organ dysfunction and to prevent or to curtail from the loss that the child will happen in the future, and prevent further injury and complications like coronary artery aneurysm, acute kidney injury. So the treatment of choice, what I was mentioning is IVIG and methylprednisolone remains the mainstay if the child is seen in shock with the multi-organ dysfunction. But if the child is without that, only methylprednisolone can be given. If the coronaries are involved, we are supposed to go at starting with the methylprednisolone. We can increase the dose or escalate the doses about 10 milligram per kg for days, and then aspirin can be added at a low dose aspirin. It is we are going with an antiplatelet because this COVID is one disorder, coagulopathy disorder. We need to consider it as a anti-platelet dose, not the anti-inflammatory dose. So if it is not responding with IVIG, 2 cycles can be continued. IVIG of 2 cycles, 2 gram per kg is the normal thing, that dose that is required for the child to be administered. And after that, if there is no improvement, infliximab or anakinra are tried. These are the quite costly medication and treatment that a child can go ahead with. These are the receptors blocking thing. And if presence with the shock, fluid plus norepinephrine will remain the mainstay of treatment along with administration of IVIG. This is for the stabilization phase. So we have to be very careful while administering fluids also, because the child may enter into the ARDS kind of presentation. So 2/3 maintenance and 10 to 20 ml of normal saline can be given, and norepinephrine is considered as a first line to maintain the vascularity, circulatory functioning. And if D dimers they are elevated by more than 5 times, then we have to start with the low molecular weight heparin, or the coronary aneurysms noted where the Z score is more than 10, or there is an evidence of thrombosis or left ventricular ejection fraction less than 35%. We need to go with the enoxaparin at the dose of 1 milligram per kg twice daily subcutaneously, and we need to monitor for the PT-INR when you are administering this. So aspirin indications, as already mentioned, it should be a low dose, and maximum dose of aspirin should not exceed beyond 80 milligram per day. So anakinra is a last mode of treatment. It is a modified version of the human interleukin receptor antagonist protein. It is given at a dose of 4 milligram per kg IV or subcutaneous. And the indication of this is there is a inadequate or no response with IVIG 2 cycles, and also with a high dose or a metered cycle dose of the methylprednisolone. And associated macrophage activation is noted. And there is a contraindication to use steroids in certain conditions. How to follow up these cases? As already mentioned, 2D echo after 2 to 6 weeks. If the coronary artery abnormality on initial echo, repeat it after 2 to 48 days until the coronary artery size is stable. And then every 1 to 2 weeks for the next 4 to 6 weeks. And if myocardial dysfunction is noted, then cardiac MRI after 2 to 6 months have to be done as a follow-up for the cardiac stability. Now coming to the take-home messages of all this: high index of suspicion in any child exposed to COVID-19 presenting with unexplained high fever and an elevation of inflammatory markers. These stays as a mainstay of diagnosing MISC. And caution is patients with less than 5 years with elevated markers because of the risk of rapidly progressing Kawa COVID, the coronary aneurysms. Once the aneurysms develop, there is a poor outcome. So we need to prevent that. So early IVIG if given, if the cases are identified early and IVIG administered, the outcome are really good. And rapid, complete clinical and myocardial recovery is seen in the cases which are clinically diagnosed at the earliest and managed. So with this, I come to an end. Thank you very much for your patient listening. Any doubts, I'll be clarifying after the next speaker completes, or I can do that in the chat box.
Thank you very much, ma'am. That was an excellent and a comprehensive presentation, and thank you very much for all the insights you've given to us. I now invite our next speaker. Our next speaker who will be speaking on COVID during perinatal period, Dr. Kalyan. Dr. Kalyan has done his MBBS from CMC Vellore, has been a gold medalist in MD Pediatrics and done fellowship and neonatology from St. John's Medical College. And he's also done DNB neonatology and MRCP CH. And he's also been the trainer of the trainers at IAP, and has presented at multiple conferences and has many papers to his credit, and also chapters. Contributed to chapters to protocol and textbooks, and his areas of interest are infection control and QI projects. He is currently the lead consultant neonatologist at Rainbow Children's Hospital, Hydernagar branch. Thank you, Kalyan, for accepting our invitation. It's great to have you here, and thank you and welcome.
First of all, I would like to thank the organization for giving me this lovely opportunity. And it's always a great feel to get back to the roots. I mean, I would love to work with Vellorites any given day. So this topic of mine is perinatal COVID. I'll start sharing my slides in a minute.
Yeah.
And I will also want to add one small word about the third wave. And every single day, a lot of parents come to my OPD and ask me only one thing: "Sir, third wave, what am I going to do?" I am not very sure as to there is so much of science behind that kind of worry, for a simple reason that our country is no different in the first wave, second wave, or the third wave. Our adult population is not as well vaccinated as the Western world, where third wave actually means the left out population, that is children. On the other hand, in our country, the adult population is only the merely is about 7 or 8% of the whole adult population are vaccinated. So still, the wave is going to be adult predominant. Children may not be the exact big chunk of cases that we will see. And in the second wave, in our unit, we have a small unit. In our unit, we have seen about 1,500 children who came to our unit as COVID positive. It's not like we did see a very quiet second wave. And as Madam just said, I am very worried about the level of MISC we're going to see in the next week or so, because our ward is already full with MISCs. I'm sure more cases are going to be there. I would want all of us to be very sure about IVIG that we use, because I don't want it to be the next Remdesivir or next drug in the black market where we run behind pillar to post to get the drug. Unlike Remdesivir, unlike many other drugs, IVIG definitely has a role in curing MISC. So we should be very cautious about how we use it. There's a beautiful paper that is going to come out from Rainbow Bangalore soon, where they are looking at number of cases referred to the unit as MISC and they're not MISC. So if you do all the markers that Madam suggested in any infection, they all come positive. Your CRP is going to be very high in urinary infection, urinary tract infection. Your IL-6 are going to be extremely high. Your ferritin is going to be high. Your DDMR is going to be high in any septic shock. So we should not be in a hurry to label as MISC, and then I think we should rule out other common causes of the presentation, and then finally label it as MISC. Going into perinatal COVID, I'm going to keep my topic very short. This per se in itself is a large topic, but then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the summary of what the major bodies across agreed upon what the current consensus on each of those things are. All right,
Yes.
I'm going to outline about the effect of COVID on fertility, what happened to artificial reproductive techniques, what happens through pregnancy, what happens to delivery, and what happens to newborn care, and finally a little bit on vaccines, the routine vaccines that we normally do. Okay, so there is a little bit of concern when it came to fertility. Till a while ago, in my last presentation, I said that COVID has no effect on fertility. But now there are a lot of papers pouring in, says that there are some concerns regarding male infertility, and it is being increasingly documented across various geographies. Like initially it came from China. Now there is a paper from Europe that says that there is probably an element of male infertility, and it is being increasingly recognized when, especially in those couples who opt for fertility techniques. It is reversible. That's what it looks like. And so we need to just take a deep breath and then wait for some more time so that things will normalize. There are also concerns about what happens with fertility with vaccination. That would be a disaster if this kind of data comes out, because we are a country, we are trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible. Anything that goes against this kind of area probably will have a big setback. As of today, there is absolutely no doubt that it has any effect on fertility as far as vaccine is concerned. Lastly, if any couple is trying to conceive, there are no recommendations to postpone their plan to conceive either with COVID infection or with vaccination. They say as little as 10 days of window is more than enough if they're willing to conceive after the full recovery of COVID disease. Moving on to artificial reproductive techniques. So when the first COVID outbreak is declared a pandemic, there was a complete cessation throughout globally. All the bodies said do not do any elective procedure as far as ARTs are concerned. Then slowly things have moved. Unlock happened across the country. Unlock happened across the world. Now even with certain guidance, all the bodies, there are your American Reproductive Society, your European Reproductive Society, Canadian Reproductive Society, including FOXI of India, have said that with certain guidelines, such as following the appropriate norms and techniques, ruling out the couple from having any trouble with COVID or COVID-related complications, we can move ahead with all forms of ART. All modalities of ART are permitted in current post-pandemic world we are living in. Now, COVID and pregnancy. Now, this is something important probably for all the adult physicians out there, and also all the neonatologists and pediatricians out there, it's important to know that COVID mothers have very mild symptoms. I have a close friend who kept denying of having any symptom other than very mild myalgia or something like that. So the symptoms are a lot milder. So we need to have high index of suspicion. So finally, when the day came and she was in full-blown labor, when she went to the hospital, into a non-COVID hospital, she was diagnosed to have COVID RT-PCR positive, and then she had to be shifted in the last minute to another hospital for delivery. So such things have to be kept in mind. Our index of suspicion should be extremely high. But however, please understand that the severity of the illness is a lot higher. There is a twofold increased chance of ICU requirement, twofold increased chance of ventilation requirement in these ladies as compared to non-pregnant ladies. So even though they are young, they are likely to land up in ICU. They're likely to require higher amounts of support. Please keep that in mind. I lost a lot of mothers who delivered their babies in our hospital to COVID. They were treated in proper adult ICU settings, but however, they are no more because of the severity of the illness per se in this particular scenario. Now, what happens to most of the roughly about 1.8 million abortions have been documented since the beginning of COVID pandemic in India alone. 1.8 million abortions. The reason was many of the couples are very worried what would happen to the fetus since they have either had COVID or they are going through a COVID pandemic per se. It is important to educate and understand that there is absolutely no report of increased congenital malformations, irrespective of whenever COVID happened. Whether it happened in the first trimester, or second trimester, or even during conceptional period, no trouble with congenital malformations. However, it is also a point of interest that there is some mild increase in late prematurity. I will also add a word here, what happened to the Netherlands and other European countries. But then in India, it is noted that more babies are coming out at 36, 35 weeks, probably related to maternal illness per se and not neonatal indication per se. And these babies are much smaller than otherwise. There is a certain degree of IUGR status that is noted in these babies. Globally, it is important probably because most of the mothers are working from home or are actually limited to home. They're not exposed to various infections that are happening in the society because there is a lot of lockdown that happened globally. So throughout the first wave and parts of second wave, there is a decrease in worldwide incidence of prematurity. That's a brilliant information for all neonatologists. We are all very happy to notice that we are not seeing the smallest of small babies anymore throughout COVID. And it also threw a lot of light into what actually caused prematurity in the first place. Like, why are these babies coming out very early in the, so once the whole COVID is over, once we're getting more and more data piling in, then probably we can find ways to prevent prematurity in the future world. Now the third point is the vertical transmission of COVID. So initially, when the COVID pandemic began, there is absolutely no documented case. There's one case that was published in China with a lot of suspicion. People did not believe it could happen. A recent meta-analysis, however, showed that there is 1.6% of all pregnancies, or 16 out of 1,000 live COVID-positive pregnancies can transmit COVID to the next generation, that is the newborn. When they further subcategorized it to look into whether it is cesarean or normal delivery, whether there is any obstetric indications such as there's a rupture of membranes and other things, abruption or other things, there is absolutely no subset showing that this one particular group is more at risk than other group, unlike HIV and unlike other vertical transmissions that we normally study. So it is important to understand that 1.6% do have a chance of getting COVID through just to the virtue of through the COVID pregnancy. So when do we test it? So in a healthy neonate, we normally test on day 1, that is within the first 24 hours of life. And if negative, we again repeat a test on day 5. This is what the NNF, IAP, and FOXI guideline suggests in India. Abroad, there's a slightly different protocol, but then in India, I think this works quite well. Day 1 and day 5, if either of them are positive, we treat it as a COVID positive baby. If both are negative, we declare it as a COVID negative baby, and we recommend what are the things that will be done at home to prevent any further transmission. Now, if a COVID positive mother delivers a baby, what do we do? So there are two choices we give families. This is what, at least in the first wave of COVID, immediately post first wave of COVID, I think this guideline will change, and we will move on to the choice 2. I'll tell you in a bit. So the first choice is we tell the family that you can separate the mother and baby completely. Test the baby. If the baby is positive, shift the baby with the mother. If the baby is negative, continue this separation. You can give express milk or formula, depending on what the mother chooses, and the baby can be handled by a healthy relative. So thereby we are completely separating baby and the mother till the mother is completely negative. The second choice is, which is very, if you think about the first choice, extremely difficult for a country like India. Think about having two different houses or two different rooms, completely separate. Family willing to pay for two different rooms to take care of baby and the mother in two different places. Very difficult in our country. The second choice is same room, separate them by about 6 feet, ask the mother to wear a mask, use the sanitizer, and then follow COVID spread preventive steps, and continue feeding by direct breastfeeds. Now, with the second wave, with the community spread being so rampant, probably we all can agree that thinking of getting a relative who is COVID negative and doing all that is a lot more difficult. So probably we'll all resort to choice two. What about lactation? A lot of mothers stop feeding the moment they get COVID positive, thinking that they may infect the baby. This is not the truth. Okay, WHO, Indian guidelines across the world, the guidance is very simple. Follow all the preventive steps, continue feeding the baby. Lastly, if what happens, if the neonate is tested positive? So it is interesting to understand that if the baby goes home and thereby gets a positivity after day 18 or day 19, we are seeing fever as a predominant sign and symptom. We normally don't see fever in our newborn clinic. Newborns do not develop fever. So in this pandemic scenario, if a newborn comes with fever, we are extremely worried. We get it tested irrespective of whether there is any history of exposure or otherwise. We are seeing colleagues in Pune and Mumbai now documenting that there are a lot of children presenting with respiratory distress with the primary COVID disease. And there are even reports of using of remdesivir and other drugs, even in newborn group, which is allowed as a restricted drug in this age group. But then in our experience in Hyderabad, there is absolutely no evidence of use of remdesivir in the first month of life. And the treatment therapy is essentially symptomatic. Fetal misc, like Madam had really quoted in one this. There are multiple case reports now. I have handled a preterm baby with maternal COVID and then maternal antibodies positive, fetal neonatal antibodies positive, and presenting with full-blown MIS kind of picture with fever and cardiac symptoms. We need to have high index of suspicion and follow the same principles that we follow in pediatric age group. Now, what about NICU? For all those who are handling NICUs, who are maintaining NICUs, it's important to understand that we need to have a separate negative section isolation scenario of an NICU, which is different from your regular NICU to handle this kind of babies. Understand nebulization, HFNC, and invasive ventilation. All three are at highest risk for viral shedding. So we need to be very careful when we are doing this in our NICU setting. And we need to have high index of suspicion for cross spread, because whenever we handle babies with COVID in NICU, always have questionnaire for your staff, your nurses, your residents on a regular basis if they have any symptom or sign, because they will be your easy spreaders from baby to baby. Routine vaccination and COVID. Routine vaccination should be continued as per your regular schedule. Your BCG, your hepatitis B, and polio drops should be given at birth for all babies with or without COVID. Post-infection, if a baby develops infection, there are no guidelines to guide us whether there should be any gap for the vaccination. But as of current guidelines, it is simple. It is the same Indian guidelines that we follow. There is increased enthusiasm among all parents and all even people also that will flu vaccine prevent COVID protection, will offer any COVID protection for babies because they are not eligible for COVID vaccination per se. There is this study which showed some lower COVID rates than otherwise with flu shots. But however, there is no current guidelines recommending the same. One simple epidemiological study, we should not guide our guidance or protocols. Lastly, COVID vaccination in children. It's still a wait and watch because there is the American trial ran into trouble with certain doubts about whether it can cause any inflammation and other symptoms. So we need to wait and watch what happens in the future. COVID vaccination and maternal lactation. Take the vaccination at the earliest, continue to feed. All vaccines are permitted for use. Can continue feeding despite having fever post-vaccination. Summarizing, fertility, there is some reports now suggesting there is a mild decline in reversible male Infertility. ART, follow guidelines but continue. Pregnancy, women have lesser symptoms, have a high index of suspicion. Vertical transmission, noted in a small fraction, but keep the index of suspicion very high. Neonatal COVID, have strict guidelines for your NICU, otherwise you'll be in trouble. Pediatric COVID, the disease tends to be mild, but we need to keep our mind open for MISC and other serious complications which are seen in a smaller group. Thank you. I'll be happy to take questions at the end of the session.
Thank you, Dr. Kalyan. Thank you. That was very informative presentation on a very important topic where many people are ambiguous about. And now we will now move on to our next speaker. Yeah, our next presentation would be on nutrition and fluid management and common drugs and dosages used in COVID-19 in children. Dr. C. Rahul is IPS from College and DCH and MD from CMC Law, and he has done a fellowship in pediatric endocrinology from National University Hospital at Singapore. He is currently working as a consultant pediatric endocrinologist at Family Clinic at Santosh Nagar in Hyderabad. He also has professional memberships in IAP and ISPAD. Dr. Rahul, thank you very much for being here with us. Warm welcome to you, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Josna, for inviting me for this. And I'd like to say hi and thank you to Dr. Sampson, sir, also. It's always nice to meet old CMC alumni and a nice platform to see all of you here.
Hi, Rahul. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll be discussing some of the more day-to-day aspects of management of COVID regarding the nutrition, regarding the common drugs which we use as in office practice, which might be helpful. It was a wonderful talk by Suchitra Madam and Dr. Kalyan, and so many things I learned from them as per NICU and PICU guidelines and management as well. So I'll be starting the talk on the day-to-day management as well as nutrition, diet, and common drugs, which I'll be covering. I'll start sharing my screen. So first, when we talk about the nutrition aspects in COVID, in general, what we advise children and parents who have children with COVID is that they should have a healthy, balanced diet, which we know regarding the healthy plate method, where half of your plate should be your fruits and vegetables, 1/4 should be the carbs, and 1/4 should be proteins, and a bit of dairy products like milk or curd. So in general, how everybody else has normal balanced diet during infections, we should advise them and encourage them to have a healthy balanced diet. Although they may not be able to drink so much or eat so much during this fever, so we should ask them to take more fluids, whichever they like. Hydrate them with coconut water, with buttermilk, or with soups, with ORS. So these all things will help them hydrate as well as giving them enough calories as well. Now, there's been talk about vitamin D supplementation, which is helping, which is being given widely in adults as well as in children who have been affected with COVID. There have been some studies which have shown a role in prophylaxis, but it's not very clear, and there's no strong recommendations in using vitamin D as prophylaxis. During treatment, again, giving vitamin D as such may help a bit, but there's really no clear-cut guidelines as to how much to give and how many days to give. So if at all somebody is vitamin D deficient, and if blood tests are done for that as part of the admission or as part of OPD management, definitely if there's deficiency, we can supplement them. If there's insufficiency, we can supplement them. And the doses will differ again a lot based on the age, newborn, child, or adolescent. So that is one thing which can be done, vitamin D supplementation, if the levels are low. Regular supplementation or recommendation to give it for everybody with COVID is actually not there. Now, regarding vitamin C, a lot of food has vitamin C, like the citrus fruit, lemon, orange juice, and a lot of other fruits as well. Vitamin C is good, and it helps in common cold. It helps in COVID infection to recover faster. Now there are tablets, Limsi tablets, which can be given during these times, but we really don't know what is the dose for in children, how much to give, and how many days to continue. So the general recommendation is to have a good diet rich in vitamin D and vitamin C. So vitamin D, again, we can give milk, we can give egg, we can give curd, we can give mushroom, and so there are in dairy products, in meat, so in fish, there's a lot of vitamin D. So we can always have these things to give us a good amount of vitamin D and vitamin C to help us improve our health as well as immunity and to recover faster. So that is regarding the nutrition aspect and the diet. When we come to the IV fluids, hydration, and the common drugs, first let us see how COVID is classified in day-to-day practice. So we saw a severe disease and MISC being spoken about by Suchitra madam. Let us see a bit about the mild and moderate disease here. So most of the children with COVID, what we see in OPD or office practice or by online consultations, are mild disease. 90 to 95% are mild in nature. They may have just fever, sore throat, cough, cold, or diarrhea and vomiting without any fast breathing. So like we say, in children, don't worry. Most of the times it is mild infection, they recover quite well. A few children are having moderate disease, which is fast breathing according to the age which Dr. Suchitra had told us initially, madam has told us, and with hypoxia, with or presence of hypoxia, which is 90 to 94% on room air, and no signs of severe disease, which was spoken about. So if they do have fast breathing, and if the saturation is 90 to 95, 94%, or if the saturation is 90 to 94, then that is classified as moderate disease. So severe disease is where there's pneumonia, where there are all the danger signs of lethargy, seizures, drowsiness, somnolence, severe diarrhea, vomiting, causing dehydration, severe abdominal pain, or critical disease, which was already spoken about with ARDS, shock, multi-organ dysfunction. So let us see regarding what are the common drugs and dosages which can be used in mild cases and also maybe in moderate cases. So that will be helpful for all of you and in clinical practice. So moderate disease and severe disease are the two conditions where admission is required, whereas mild disease can be managed at home and with OPD visits. So this is a classification based and the treatment guidelines based on the IAP given by the Indian Academy of Pediatrics. And it's very simple and all of us do follow this. For mild disease, it requires OPD based management or home treatment by online consults or talking to your regular pediatrician. It's important to maintain the hydration by giving a lot of fluids, by hydrating them well, ensuring that the urine output is good. And also if somebody is breastfeeding, then do breastfeed and maintain the hydration. That's very important. Importantly, in mild disease cases, there's no role of antibiotics. As we know, COVID is a viral infection and viruses don't really respond to antibiotics. If there is fever, then paracetamol can be given. If nose blocked, then nasal drops can be given. And symptomatic management for the cold, for the cough, for the vomiting, diarrhea can be given, which I'll be discussing in the further slide, the dosage and drugs. There are no investigations required, no CRP, no ESR, no CBP, nothing for mild cases. Multivitamins may be given, although there is no real proven value, just like how vitamin D and vitamin C also have no real proven value. The red flag signs are rapid breathing, saturation less than 95%, and there's persistent fever more than 3 days, lethargy, drowsiness, or poor feeding, or reduced urine. So these are some of the things that we should look for, and these certainly require visit to the doctor in the hospital and will require admission as well. If there's high-grade fever for more than 3 to 4 days, then it could be other things which was already spoken about, and we need to evaluate them. Then when we have moderate disease, it's always recommended to admit in COVID-19 ward when there's tachypnea, fast breathing, and the saturation is 90 to 94%. Again, in such cases, baseline investigations required based on the Tier 1, what was spoken about, CP, RFT, LFT, CRT, X-rays, the baseline investigation. So we don't need D-dimers, we don't need ferritins, we don't need the other things if there's only moderate disease. However, they need to be repeated 40 to 72 hours as per the clinical condition to see if it's increasing, whether we should be more watchful and repeat them earlier and further treatment is to be instituted or not. If saturation is more than 94%, then oxygen is not required. You just need to hydrate them, give paracetamol, and because there's a worry about secondary bacterial infections, we may or may not give antimicrobials depending on the clinical assessment. If saturation is less than 94%, then we should give oxygen, and there's a role of IV steroids plus or minus remdesivir and antimicrobials in this case. Now, remdesivir again is only in hospital setting, and the ICU, and decided by the pediatric intensivist like Dr. Suchitra madam, and the doses mentioned here, but I don't want to go into the detail here. You can always look it up. Steroids, the dose recommended is 0.15 mg per kg of IV DEXA with maximum 6 mg once daily for 5 to 14 days, and we should stop at discharge and send them home. Again, the duration will be dependent on the clinical scenario based on the assessment of the clinician, but this is the dose that is recommended as part of the protocol. Antimicrobials, the commonly used ones are amoxicillin plain or coamaxiclav along with euclavulinate, or IV ceftriaxone is commonly used in hospitals as a broad spectrum IV antibiotic. So even in a suspect COVID case or in confirmed COVID case, if bacterial co-infection is suspected, then these antimicrobials can definitely be given, but not for the mild disease where there's hardly any symptoms and low-grade fevers. Enoxaparin has already been discussed, which is not part of day-to-day management as such, but in case you want the doses, it's definitely, you can always see it here for the doses. Severe disease has already been covered. So let me speak a bit more about the mild disease and hydration, how to maintain it, what is the IV fluids that has to be given, and for mild cases or moderate cases, for moderate cases, and the common drugs that we use in OPD practice. So the fluid requirement in children, if it's mild infection, they definitely don't require any IV fluids. It can be managed at home with oral hydration. Even moderate disease, if the hydration can be maintained orally, it is better to encourage them to take oral hydration. And if they require supplementation, we can give them IV fluids. So everyone working in hospitals in COVID wards, this is a general fluid requirement based on the Holiday Saga formula. Up to 10 kilos. The total daily dose requirement is 100 ml per kg per day. For example, a child is 9 kilos. So 900 ml per day divided by 24 hours will give us the hourly dose. So you can either write instructions for 900 ml over 24 hours or hourly dose by dividing over 24. So again, you can give NS or DNS or half DNS based on the clinical scenario. Normally in hospitals, we do write DNS or half DNS for children. For children between 11 to 20 kilos, in addition to the 1000 ml, what was calculated for 10 kilos, we need to add 50 ml per kg for every kilo over 10 kilos. For example, if a child is 15 kilos, we need to take 1000 ml for the first 10 kilos and then 50 ml per kg. That is 5 into 550 is 250. So 1250 ml over 24 hours can be the order that you can place. So 1250 ml over 24 hours, or you can divide by 24 hours to get an hourly rate if you're using infusion pumps or syringe pumps. Again, for children more than 20 kilos, we take the 1000 ml and 500 ml for the next 10 kilos. So 1500 ml for the first 20 kilos and add 20 ml per kg for every kilo over 20 kilos. For example, if a child is 24 kilos, you take 1500 ml and add 20 into 4, which is 80. So that is how, suppose a child is 25 kilos, you add 1500 ml plus 20 into 500, 1600 ml over 24 hours, or you can get an hourly rate by dividing it by 24. So this is for moderate infection, which are not in shock and which are not requiring ICU stay. For them, you again require fluid restriction and other things which will be needed. In general, we normally add potassium as well, which is 5 ml KCl per 500 ml of IV fluids to whatever fluid we are giving. So this is the fluid amount which needs to be given. The choice which one to give is either DNS or half DNS. And in certain circumstances, if child is taking very well orally and all, you can just put half NS as well as the maintenance fluids. And regarding the potassium, I just told you regarding 5 ml per K for 500 ml of IV fluids, we can add it 5 ml KCl. Now, the common drugs which we use in practice are, it all depends on the weight. So I'm giving you a per kg per dose. So paracetamol is 10 to 15 ml per kg. You can give it either when the fever is more than 100 degrees as an SOS basis, or you can keep it every 6 hourly or 8 hourly. The maximum single dose that can be used is 1 gram.
No problem.
Paracetamol, even the IV medication also is the same dose. The oral and IV, the dose is the same. You can have different preparations like Crocin drops, Calpol drops, P125, your Calpol 250. So the different preparations, it's important to know, look at the label and see how much ml contains how many mg, and then only prescribe the ml dose. There's no easy way to remember like 2.5 ml or 5 ml. So it's important to know the dose per kg. If somebody is giving ibuprofen, this is Brufen, or as part of Combiflam, the dose is 5 to 10 mg per kg, can be given 6 to 8 hourly, or sometimes it's recommended when the fever is very high to bring down the fever immediately to avoid the toxic symptoms. So the maximum dose of ibuprofen is 400 mg, which can be given at once as a single dose. There are combinations of paracetamol, ibuprofen like Combiflam, which are also used. But ideally, it's better to give just plain paracetamol in all cases without going for ibuprofen, because we know that NSAIDs can cause a bit of gastric irritation and a bit of complications on the kidney if there's deranged renal function. So always, I prefer paracetamol, and this is a dose which is to be used. And I give it on SOS basis, but can be given on 8 hourly or 6 hourly basis as well. Now, the other common things which are children with COVID have is cough and cold. So the two commonly used medicines as antihistaminics are chlorpheniramine maleate and cetirizine. Chlorpheniramine maleate is there as part of as combination drug with phenylephrine on most drugs. So what we should check for is the dose of chlorpheniramine maleate and then prescribe it. The different preparations like Temenic, Maxtra, Solvent Cold, which are available. The dose of chlorpheniramine is 0.1 mg per kg, which is usually given 8 hourly or thrice daily. And the maximum single dose is 4 mg, which can be given. So whenever you prescribe these medicines, we can always check the weight per kg dose and then prescribe it accordingly, seeing how many ml has to be given. Cetirizine is again another thing which is commonly used. It's available as various forms, Zyrtec, Cetirizine, Cetirizine. So the dose for 6 months to 2 years old is 2.5 mg once daily dose. Whereas for 2 to 5 years, it can be given 2.5 to 5 mg once daily dose. It's usually given at bedtime because it can cause a bit of drowsiness and sleepiness. And if the child is more than 5 years, then 5 to 10 mg dose once daily. So this is not a per kg dose, but based on the age, it is a single dose which is there. So cetirizine can be commonly used in your clinical practice. If you want to give for cough and cold, it works quite well. There's no specific duration that needs to be given, but until the symptoms resolve, until the cough and cold completely subsides. Antibiotics, if you're in a hospital setting and you're admitting cases for moderate infection or mild, or children who are dehydrated, not taking well orally, and they require IV fluids if their urine output is less, the dose is 50 to 100 mg per kg, once daily dose, and the maximum dose is 2 grams. So you can give somewhere between this dose, and that should be sufficient for the child, with the maximum once daily dose of 2 grams. Amoxicillin is available as Novamox in the pharmacy. So its oral dose is 15 to 30 mg per kg, given thrice daily, with the maximum single dose of 500 mg. Augmentin is again another commonly available oral medication, antibiotic. The dose is 20 to 30 mg per kg. It's given 12th hourly, and maximum single dose is 625 mg in children. And suppose children have ear infection, otitis media, at higher dose is used more than what is prescribed here. But this is for the common cold and cough. If you want to give an antibiotic cover, then this is the dose that has to be given. And this is the amoxicillin component that should look for 20 to 30 mg per kg, what I was saying. If they're admitted in the hospital and you want to give IV Augmentin, the dose is 30 mg per kg, 8 hourly, with the maximum single dose of 1.2 gram. The other way to do it is 100 mg per kg per day in 3 divide doses is the other way it is followed, which was when I was in CMC. So these are the commonly used antibiotics which you might be requiring to use if somebody has COVID in childhood. The other thing is for vomiting, we need antiemetics. So ondansetron is commonly prescribed for vomiting. It has to be given before the food so that the food doesn't come out. And the dose is, oral dose is 0.1 to 0.2 mg per kg, 6th hourly or 8th hourly it can be given. The single maximum dose of 8 mg. It's available as Emicit, Vomikind. It's available as various other preparations like Ondem. Antidiarrheals, again, diarrhea is a common presentation in COVID in children. So elemental zinc is prescribed 10 mg once daily for less than 6 months and 20 mg once daily for more than 6 months. It's usually given for a duration of 14 days, can be given for 10 to 14 days. And it's available as preparations, ZND drops or syrup zinconia or syrup ZN20. So these are some of the common preparations. And you again need to check the ml that is required for this dose and then prescribe it. Along with zinc, ORS is advisable whenever they have diarrhea. So you can give ORS ad lib, and after every loose stool, it's recommended to give ORS. Again, the dose depends on the weight, but as general rule, 10 ml per kg of ORS after each loose stool is a good enough dose. Along with this, a lot of times multivitamin is prescribed as part of routine management. There's no real specific dose for that, but 2.5 ml or 5 ml can be prescribed once daily as part of management. So these are common drugs. I hope this was helpful, and we covered antibiotics for fever, for cough cold medicines, antibiotics if required, vomiting and diarrhea medicines, and for rash, that's another common presentation. You can always give calamine lotion, available as Calasoft or Calapure or Dermadew Calo, can be applied to the skin. Atarax or cetirizine works well as an oral medication for the rash. So with this, I hope I covered the commonly used drugs and also regarding the hydration when a child is admitted in hospital. I hope this was useful for you.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul. That was a very detailed presentation, and I'm sure that it has given many insights into the management of COVID in children. I now request Dr. Samson Sujit Kumar sir, who is one of the directors at Unicorpus, to propose a word of thanks. And before that, I would like...
Before that, the question was, a lot of people are waiting for us.
There are not many questions here, but if anybody wants to ask questions, please unmute yourself and ask the questions to the speakers, please.
Josna, I have a question for Dr. Sucharita. Can you hear me?
Sucharita? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please go ahead.
Because in the villages and everything, there is no awareness of this pediatric COVID presentation. Do you have any teaching material for in Telugu to that the area workers can kind of educate the population in rural areas?
Yeah, ma'am. Like actually, we are on behalf of the state government of Telangana, we have made a module, and in a couple of days, government is going to conduct multiple camps also regarding this, and we are doing it in local languages also, and probably by another 2 weeks, I believe, we will be having that by hand. So once the material is ready, then I can share the PDF for the handouts also. Or if you want anything,
can be distributed to the public,
to Unicorpus also.
I would appreciate that if that can be available.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Madam, what are your views about, they are saying the third wave is coming and it's going to be a double mutant, it's going to be very dangerous.
Yes, that was the first initial thing when I started saying that children are much spared because of the receptor decrease or a less number of receptors in children. So we need not worry about our children having this. It was only on a foresight or a thought saying that it could be the third wave because they are not vaccinated. But children can spare well because they are spared off well because of lack of all these receptors in their body. Maybe the other systems where the receptors are more, the entry point is not there. When you don't have an entry point, then there is no supposition thought wherein the infection will be more. The infectivity rate will be more, definitely like what we see in adults. we have seen the same way of spread, but they are mild to moderate more. 80%, around 70 to 80% are mild to moderate cases. The severe are only, the moderate are around 10 to 15, and the severe are less than 5. So need not worry about the third wave, but take care of your children and don't just dump them with all the multinutrients and the vitamin D, which has been as a practice, routine practice over last 1 year. Even that excess of the doses of vitamin D may cause other problems also. We need to be careful about it.
There's some talk about zinc, extra zinc causing this black fungus and mucormycosis. Is there any
not
truth in
exactly,
it?
not exactly. It's a micro element, what we call zinc as a micro element, and that is definitely deficient in our nutrition or the diet what we take or what children are given regularly. So we need to be very watchful and careful. The diarrheas are quite common because this zinc enables for the gut the mucociliary activity and to retain the immunity of the gut to prevent excessive loss and also to decrease the longer duration. That is the reason only in diarrheas and also in pneumonias we prescribe about the zinc supplementation.
Okay. Like a Zincovit syrup would do, madam? Even in diarrhea, normally we stop all these Zincovit, any vitamins, and we just give electrol and electrolytes and Sporolac, lactobacillus.
Very true, very true. The probiotics have to be given electrol. The oral ORS has to be supplemented to balance the electrolytes. Apart from that, the zinc, that's what I was mentioning. Like zinc is supplemented not like a Zincovit. The quantity of Zincovit, the zinc in Zincovit is 5 mg. But as the previous speaker has quite good mentioned, Rahul has mentioned that the requirement is 10 mg up to 6 months. And above 6 months, it is 20 mg per day for 14 days.
Okay.
Even if the diarrhea stops, they need to continue the duration and continue it for exact 14 days and stop it.
Because for human beings, madam, for bigger, adults, it is like 10 to 12 milligrams per day is the zinc requirement, but they were giving 50 milligrams in COVID. Was it okay? Or then after some time, I told all the patients to stop that 50 milligrams once they got over COVID because they were still taking.
No.
But for children, is it 10 to 20 milligrams, madam, as you were saying?
Yeah, very true. That is 10 is for less than 6 months and 20 mg once daily for more than that 6 months, above 6 months to 5 years.
Okay. Because for adults, it's like 10 to 12 milligrams per day.
Yeah.
That's the requirement. Right. Thank you. And what about Covaxin vaccination for children, which they were trying, ma'am?
That's what we are mentioning. The trials are still going on, and we need to see how the response is noted in children because children spare well with the infection not getting into or not becoming very severe or sick unless they had some comorbidities or lung afflictions like cystic fibrosis, or it could be because of lung disease and all. So only those children need to be taken, or leukemias or hemolytic anemias. Only these children which who have the comorbidities need to be considered on first line for going ahead with the vaccination. That is still in progress.
But the children receive so many vaccinations, madam. Do you think it's going to harm them in any way? They receive so many. Nowadays, you give rotavirus, you give this, you give that. Children are really...
They're much protective, maybe because of all this. That's what even somebody asked about the flu shots. Yes, because they received all these shots, their immune response is quite good and they're able to combat the infection also. Because the lymphatic tissue in children is much better and functional rather than in adult. As the age increases, the capacity or the lymphocyte proliferations and all will decrease over the age. That is how the children are faring well with the disease.
Is it something to do with the thymus being there till 10 years of age?
Yes, very true.
Dr. Suchitra, once, good evening, Amma.
Good evening, Nana.
Just one simple question, just in terms of numbers. 0 to 19 years of age constitute up to 40 to 45% of Indian population.
Yes.
Assuming that even 50% of them are infected.
Yes.
That comes to 20% of 130 crores. That is almost 25 to 30 crores. Even if 5% of them are serious, that is a huge number, no? For India.
Yes.
So should we be worried and be watchful for this third wave or be relaxed?
Very true, Anna. The third wave will be for those definitely about 12 years. It's not below 12 years. So children, that is a span that we are considering. Even when we give numbers to the government, the other day we had a huge discussion about it. the number, we consider children up to 12 years. That is the thing. About 12 to 19, definitely we need to expect. So the wave is going to be in that box, I have to say. So because we don't have like in other statistics like in UK or US, we don't have the statistics saying that 0 to 5, 5 to 12, about 12. So they consider up to 19 years. So we have been ruling out for this. How we came down for the statistics, which was mentioned earlier in the newspapers, also around 6,000 cases might be getting infected over the couple of months. This is the same data what we mentioned, that out of that 30 lakhs population would be children in this in the state of Telangana. In 30 lakh population, if you take as this same 10%, 30,000 will be affected. In 30,000, again the 26 maybe the normal, and about only 5,000 will be the severe critical ill. That's how we came down on numbers. But exactly we don't have the picture. But definitely the serious illness is noted about 12 years. That part we are very sure. So the thing is 12 to 19, they need to be considered based on the weight as an adult only, not as a pediatric case. So rather than having a pediatric protocol for them, we need to go ahead with the adult protocol for children above 35 kgs of weight.
So that means we need to be more watchful in patients who are 12 to 19 years of age.
Yes, very true.
So just one more query, ma'am, that if beyond 19 years of age, won't it be like the same for between the 12 to 19, or why? I mean, we are only thinking of 12 to 19 and not
12 to 19 is
12
what
above.
they mentioned as a children. The third wave, the children, what they're saying is, you're not expecting below 12. Above 12, definitely the risk is higher.
Isn't it equal to an adult risk?
Yes, the same thing. It is like the adult risk only.
So the adults
above 14 years, we have this immune responses coming on a lower note, and they are quite prone to have infections which are not which are like adult lung only. What we see the presentation. The children who succumbed also were in the same ages in the last couple of months. What we noted, above 14 years, we had so many deaths that we have noticed in this wave. So that is an alarming thing. So the college going students and the higher education students are to be immunized at the earliest. That is what we suggest.
Madam, just one more thing. Sorry, I might be taking too much of your time. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please go.
Yeah, so the adults, what we saw in this wave, at the end of this wave, more or less like 2 weeks back and all, we lost more young people who were like 24, 26, like more of the young people were lost. But the older people, even on the group, they wrote that they didn't, they just came out of, even with comorbidities, the older people, 65, 60 with comorbidities, they came out of the similar situation with going into hospital with oxygen levels of 87, 89, like that.
The simple reason was the same. The presence of receptors, the AC receptors, how good they are and how much they are functioning. So the number, the availability of that is more in this age group, and above 60, it becomes the same. The receptor number come down. And if in spite of having the lower receptors, if they're affected, at that age, they are getting infected. And that was seen in the first wave. But in the second wave, the infectivity rate as the mutant strain has really turned out most horrible. And we could see so many cases, so many youngsters losing. So it is the same component that B16172. That is a very wild variant what we are seeing as of now. Still rampant in India. So we need to be careful even after the lockdown.
I mean, can Bethadine gargles and all help, as they were saying? Can they help?
Garglings and all will help to some extent, but on other hand, what is happening is excessive steam inhalation. It decreases
that is bad.
Yeah. Not excessive. Anything in excess will definitely cause a damage. We need to take that into consideration, that you can do the throat gargling, because now the black fungus, the cases are rising. What we have noted in the past couple of weeks, like last 2 weeks, we are seeing the COVID cases have come down, and on rise, we are seeing the black fungus. So previously, it was not that. Though the mucor was existing, we never knew how bad it would be. But despite of not having the underlying comorbidities like, diabetes or any other immune deficiency conditions, still they are presenting with mucor. So mucor is in rise. We need to be very watchful and careful about that.
Madam, this is for a young adult.
Young
adult who has fungal infections on their skin, and had COVID, had a little bit of, just for 5 or 7 days, had steroid because the COVID wasn't very bad. It was like mild to moderate, had steroid, have had antiviral for about the whole treatment for about 10 days. And now it's nearly a month since then. We are giving Ecosprin to all of them for the next 3 months, but he has a fungal infection in the body here, there, skin infections. So can we give normal antifungals? I mean, just to control that, better to give, you think, ma'am? If he
Yeah, you
has
can go
fungal.
ahead. Yes, you can go ahead to treat the local infection, fungal infections, because of the skin barrier that was disrupted because of any reason. And because of COVID brings down the immune status also, that also may lead to the added infections. This can be treated on a simple basis, but steroids was thought as a substitutory thing in the thing for a longer while. Those who were on high dose steroids for a longer while, definitely they are at high risk.
No, this was a mild dose of steroid for just 5
Yeah,
days,
you
7
can
days.
and treat them with the normal antifungals and local topical applicants also.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, they are not at risk of getting black fungus. No, what I'm saying. It's already a month since they.
No, not exactly.
Hi, ma'am. This is Dr. Ritesh. Ma'am, my question is, can we, I'm working with the orphans, HIV patients. Can we give, there is a one person who turned into 18. Can we give the vaccination of COVID?
Yes, immunocompromised, they need to, because usually we don't go ahead with the live vaccines for them. Killed vaccine,
Okay.
Covaxin can be given.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions? Please unmute yourself and you can ask the speakers, please. Okay, if there are no further questions, I really thank all the participants and all the speakers for giving their time. I now request Dr. Samson, sir, to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Jyotsna, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you, and I'd like to extend special thanks to our speakers for the day. I'd like to thank Dr. Suchitra, Associate Professor of Pediatrics, Department of Pediatrics, Gandhi Medical College, Hyderabad. Dr. Suchitra, thank you, Amma, for your precious time and for enlightening us about the treatment.
Definitely, we will be there with you.
It's always a blessing to have you as a speaker, and very informative, very practical, and up to date. And we really appreciate your effort. And may God bless you and your team as you lead the treatment for these COVID-infected children at Gandhi Medical College. And God bless you and your family, Amma. Thank you. And I would like to thank Kalyan. Kalyan, good to see you. And thank you for taking time. Kalyan is a neonatologist at Rainbow Hospitals, Hyderabad. Kalyan, thank you very much, and good to see you. And
always a pleasure to be a part of the team, sir.
Playing an important role at Rainbow, and may God bless your team as you lead the team in treating COVID-infected small children during this time. And may God bless you and your family. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the way you presented. It was really wonderful. Thank you, Kalyan. God bless you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Rahul, of a long time. Good to see you. Not able to meet you all, but good to see you, Rahul. And thank you. Good to know that you are with the family clinic now. And thank you for your time and explain to all grown-up old people like us about the dosages and nutrition in pediatrics cases. So thank you very much. And it was very, very, very precise. And God bless you and your family. And as you lead these clinics in treating patients with COVID and also patients with endocrinology disorders. And I would like to thank all the participants, all the doctors from across the city, from across the state, and also some mission hospital students and PG students, and some non-medical staff who are likely to be involved in COVID care in the future. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for the time that you've taken to participate in this, to equip ourselves with this knowledge that is very much required in this time, because when there's a disaster, when the numbers are very high, then everybody becomes a front warrior. So thank you for participating in this webinar. And I'd like to thank Dr. Jyotsna for coordinating everything and for coordinating this program. And may God bless all of us, each one of us, as we equip ourselves as front warriors for this season. And pray that this COVID third wave will be much less intense than what is being speculated. And may the children be protected. And Let us all be prepared to do what we are. Thank you one and all for your participation. May God bless each one of us. Thank you, Amma. God bless all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Amma. Thank you, Dr. Suchitra. Thank you, Kalyan. Thank you, Rahul. And thank you all the participants.
Very much, Anna.